They say everyone has a story to tell. But what they don't tell you is that some of us have been collecting stories for centuries, weaving them into the fabric of human memory like threads of silk through ancient tapestries. My name is Lars Aester, and for the past 243 years, I've been writing other people's lives while secretly embedding fragments of my own forgotten existence into the pages of history. I am a ghostwriter. But not the kind you're imagining. The rain hammered against the windows of my Manhattan office that November evening, creating a rhythm that reminded me of heartbeats, something I'd long ago ceased to possess. The city sprawled below, a constellation of electric lights that would have seemed like sorcery to the boy I once was in 1781. Now, they were simply the backdrop to my work. My latest client sat across from me, fingers drumming nervously on the mahogany desk. Dominic Thorne, tech billionaire. 42 years old, though his face bore the weight of someone who'd lived twice that. The humans always looked so tired now, even the successful ones. Perhaps especially the successful ones. "Mr. Aester," he began, his voice carrying the slight rasp of too many late-night conference calls. "Your reputation precedes you. They say you're the best in the business. That you can make anyone sound immortal on the page." I allowed myself a thin smile. If only he knew the irony. "I've helped many people tell their stories, Mr. Thorne. What makes you think yours needs telling?" He leaned forward, eyes bright with the fever of ego that I'd seen in countless subjects before him. "I've revolutionized 3 industries. I've changed how people communicate, how they think, how they live their daily lives. But when I'm gone, I want people to understand the man behind the innovations. Not just the headlines, but the truth. The truth. Such a peculiar concept when you've lived as long as I have. Truth becomes layered, like sediment in ancient rock, and what surfaces depends entirely on where you dig." "Very well," I said, pulling out my leather journal. The same one I'd carried since 1823, its pages replaced countless times, but the cover original, worn smooth by centuries of handling. "Let's begin with your childhood. Tell me your earliest memory." As Dominic launched into his practiced narrative about growing up in suburban Connecticut, I began to write. But I wasn't just transcribing his words. I was already weaving in my own memories, subtle as spider silk. When he described his father's workshop, I wrote about the smell of sawdust and oil, but I was remembering my own father's blacksmith forge in a small Bavarian village, the heat of it, the ring of hammer on anvil. When Dominic spoke of feeling different from other children, I captured that alienation perfectly, because I remembered the growing hunger, the way sunlight began to burn, the night I died and awoke to an eternity I never asked for. This was my art, my curse, my salvation. I've written 37 autobiographies in my career as Lars Aester. Before that, I was Henrik Volsing, penning memoirs for European nobility. Before that, Nathaniel Greaves, chronicling the lives of American industrial magnates. I change my name every few decades, let the old identity fade into obscurity, and reinvent myself in a new city with new credentials that money and time can easily fabricate. But the work remains the same. I take the raw clay of human experience and shape it into something lasting, something beautiful. And in doing so, I steal moments of immortality for myself. You see, I cannot be photographed. My image doesn't capture properly in any medium invented after my turning. I cannot become famous in my own right, cannot leave my mark on the world through conventional means. But through these books, these supposedly authentic first-person narratives of the great and powerful, I live on. A line here about a sunset that moved me to tears, from 1803, when I still remembered how to cry. A paragraph there about the loss of a lover. Margaret, her name was, dead now for 190 years, but alive forever in the memoirs of a senator, a movie star, a Supreme Court justice. They think they're describing their own heartbreaks, and perhaps they are. But they're also describing mine. The beauty of ghostwriting is that no one questions the prose. The clients trust that I'm simply polishing their words, making them shine. And readers? They believe they're getting unfiltered access to greatness. None suspect that buried in these testimonies of human achievement are the scattered bones of a vampire's long-extinct humanity. My assistant, Petra Valdis, was the only living person who knew the truth. I'd turned her 12 years ago, not out of loneliness, I told myself, but necessity. The modern world required someone who could handle daytime meetings, answer phone calls during sunlit hours, manage the practicalities of a business that never slept. She entered my office now, her presence announced by the faint scent of the night-blooming jasmine she wore. Even after 12 years, she hadn't fully embraced what she'd become. She still wore perfume, still ate food occasionally despite having no nutritional need for it. I found it endearing, this clinging to human habits. "The Thorne contract is signed," she said, placing the papers on my desk. "He's eager to start. Wants the book finished in 6 months." "They always want it fast," I murmured, scanning the contract. "As if their lives can be distilled in a season." "Will you tell him?" Petra asked quietly. "What you really do? Would you want to know?" I countered. "If you were him." That the beautiful prose describing your triumph over adversity is actually describing someone else's night in a Prague dungeon in 1834? That your words about your daughter's birth are laced with my memories of watching my sister die of consumption? Petra was silent for a moment. "Don't you think they have a right to their own stories?" It was a question she'd asked before, in different forms. It was a question I'd been asking myself for 2 centuries. "Everyone's story is borrowed," I said finally. "We're all just echoes of those who came before. I'm simply more honest about it." Over the following months, I met with Dominic Thorne twice a week. We'd sit in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, or sometimes in his Hampton estate, and he'd talk while I wrote. He told me about his first company, built in a college dorm room with 2 friends he later betrayed for controlling shares. He spoke of his 3 marriages, each one a casualty of his ambition. He described his children with a distance that broke my heart, or would have, if that organ still functioned beyond the mechanical necessity of moving blood through my system. Dominic was brilliant, driven, and profoundly lonely. In that, we weren't so different. There was this moment, he told me during our 15th session, staring out at the winter-bare trees of Central Park. I was 26, and I'd just secured funding for my second startup. I was at a party, surrounded by people celebrating me, and I felt nothing. Like I was watching it all happen to someone else. As he spoke, I was writing, but I was also remembering. A party in Vienna, 1889. I'd been invited by a composer whose biography I was penning. The music, the lights, the press of warm bodies, and me, cold among them, present but not part of it. The loneliness of being surrounded by life while being fundamentally separate from it. I wrote Dominic's memory, but I infused it with my own. The resulting paragraph would become, I knew, one of the most powerful in the book. Readers would praise Dominic's emotional honesty, his vulnerability. They wouldn't know they were reading the confession of a monster who'd forgotten how to be human. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him, pen poised. "The choices that led you here?" Dominic turned to look at me, and for a moment, I saw something ancient in his young eyes. Not my kind of ancient. He'd live and die in the span of a blink for me, but ancient nonetheless. Worn down by the weight of his own history. "Every day," he whispered. "But I can't undo it. I can only tell the story and hope someone learns from my mistakes." The manuscript was nearly complete when Petra came to me with a problem. We were in my apartment, a converted factory loft in Brooklyn, far enough from Manhattan's bustle to maintain privacy, close enough to remain accessible. The space was filled with books, centuries of them, in dozens of languages. My real collection, the one I could never display publicly. "There's a journalist," Petra said, her voice tight with concern. "Miranda Castellanos. She's been asking questions." I looked up from the 1847 journal I'd been reading, research for a historical novel I was writing under yet another pseudonym. "What kind of questions?" "About you. About patterns in the books you've written." Petra handed me a tablet displaying an article draft. She's noticed similarities. Repeated phrases, specific metaphors, descriptions that appear across multiple autobiographies spanning decades. I read through Miranda's notes with growing unease. She was thorough, I'd give her that. She'd identified 17 instances of nearly identical prose across 12 different books I'd ghostwritten over the past 50 years. Descriptions of loneliness, of observing human connection from outside, of time moving differently than it seemed to for others. She thinks it's plagiarism, Petra continued. That you're a fraud recycling material across clients. She hasn't figured out the truth, that it's all original material, just yours, not theirs. Where is she now? She's requested an interview. With you, specifically. I should have refused. Should have had my lawyer send a cease and desist, should have buried the story before it grew teeth. But something in Miranda's writing intrigued me. She wasn't just looking for a scandal. She was asking deeper questions about authorship, about who owns a story, about the nature of truth in autobiography. She was asking my questions. Set up a meeting, I told Petra. Tonight, if possible. Miranda Castellanos arrived at my office at 11 p.m., young and sharp-eyed, with a kind of determination that reminded me of journalists from another era, the ones who actually cared about truth rather than clicks. She couldn't have been more than 30, dressed in professional casual, a recorder in one hand and a worn notebook in the other. Mr. Aester, she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Her pulse thrummed against my palm, a reminder of the life flowing through her. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Your research was compelling, I said, gesturing for her to sit. Though perhaps not in the way you intended. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I found repeated passages across 12 autobiographies you've ghostwritten. The phrasing is too similar to be coincidence. Are you using the same material for multiple clients? In a manner of speaking, I admitted. Though not in the way you think. I watched her carefully as I spoke, trying to gauge how much truth she could handle. She was recording our conversation, yes, but something told me this interview would never see publication, at least not in its original form. I don't steal from my clients, I continued. I add to them. Every person's story is universal in some way, Ms. Castellanos. We all feel loss, loneliness, joy, connection. When I write these autobiographies, I'm not just transcribing. I'm finding the universal in the specific. And sometimes, the universal comes from my own experience. So you admit to fabricating parts of these supposedly authentic memoirs? I admit to enhancing them, to finding the emotional truth beneath the facts. I leaned forward. Tell me, when you write an article, do you include every word your source says? Or do you select, arrange, polish? Are you not, in your way, a ghostwriter as well? She bristled at that. It's not the same. I'm reporting facts. You're creating false narratives. Am I? I pulled out my current manuscript, Dominic Thorne's autobiography. I turned to a passage I'd written just days before. Listen to this. In the quiet hours before dawn, I stood at my window and watched the city sleep, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Success, I realized, was just another form of isolation, a glass wall that let you see the world but never truly touch it. I looked at Miranda. Dominic said something like this to me. But those exact words, that specific metaphor, that's mine. From a night in 1952, standing at a different window in a different city, watching a world I could no longer be part of. So tell me, whose story is it? His or mine? And does it matter if it captures a truth we've both lived? Miranda stared at me for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She turned off her recorder. How long have you been doing this? She asked quietly. Longer than you'd believe. Try me. And so I told her. Not everything, even I knew better than that. But I told her enough. About the centuries of lives I'd chronicled, the memories I'd embedded, the way I'd been trying to write myself back into existence one autobiography at a time. I've been dead for 243 years, I said. In all that time, I've watched empires rise and fall, seen technologies that would seem like magic to my mortal self. But I cannot leave my own mark on history. I cannot be remembered. So I steal moments of remembrance in the only way I can. You're asking me to believe you're a vampire, Miranda said flatly. I smiled, letting my fangs show. I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm telling you what is. She didn't scream, didn't run. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, studying me like I was a particularly interesting puzzle. "Prove it." I stood, walked to the window. Dawn was still hours away, but I could feel it coming, the way humans feel a storm on the horizon. "What would convince you? Parlor tricks? Superhuman strength?" I turned back to her. "Or would you rather have a truth that matters?" I returned to my desk, pulled out a book from 1923. This is the autobiography of Theodore Vance, oil tycoon. Page 247. There's a description of his mother's death from influenza during the Spanish flu pandemic. It's beautiful, heart-wrenching, and completely mine. My mother died in 1769 from a fever I never learned the name of. But the grief that translated perfectly across centuries. I pulled out another book, from 1967. Civil rights leader, Malcolm Prescott. Page 189. He describes seeing his father beaten by police. I wrote about watching my friend Jonas dragged from a tavern by soldiers in 1798 Berlin for the crime of defending a Jewish merchant. Different oppression, same rage. Book after book, I showed her. Fragments of my life scattered across decades of other people's stories. "This is incredible," Miranda breathed. "You're a primary source for centuries of history, but no one knows it. You're invisible." "Now you understand my curse," I said softly. "I have stories that matter, memories that should be preserved, but I can never tell them as my own. So I weave them into the narratives of the living, hoping that some essence of my existence survives." Miranda visited me 3 more times over the following weeks. Each time, she asked more questions, took more notes. But she never published her exposé. Instead, one night in early spring, she came to me with a proposal. "I want to write your story," she said. "The real one. Not hidden in someone else's autobiography. Yours." I laughed, a bitter sound. "I just told you that's impossible." "No, you told me you can't be photographed, can't be famous in your own right. But that's not the same thing." She pulled out her notebook, flipped to a page covered in her cramped handwriting. "What if we did it as fiction? A novel about a vampire ghostwriter who embeds his memories in celebrity memoirs. We could tell your whole story, every truth, but package it as fantasy. No one would believe it's real." "And what would be the point?" I asked. "To have my life dismissed as imagination?" "The point," Miranda said intensely, "is that it would be told. Your story in your words, or close enough. And maybe buried in that fiction, readers would find something true. Isn't that what you've been doing all along? Hiding truth in apparent fiction, fiction in apparent truth." I considered her words. For 2 centuries, I'd been a parasite on other people's narratives. But what Miranda was offering was different. A collaboration. A partnership between the living and the dead, between fact and fiction. "Why would you do this?" I asked. "What do you gain?" "The greatest story of my career," she admitted. "But also, I understand what you've been trying to do. I'm a journalist because I believe stories matter, that they preserve things that would otherwise be lost. You've been doing the same thing, just in a different way. I want to help you do it better." While Miranda and I began outlining my story, our story, I continued working with Dominic Thorne. His manuscript was nearly complete, just a final few sessions to polish the ending. But during what I thought would be our last meeting, Dominic surprised me. "I need to tell you something," he said, his usual confidence cracked. "Something I haven't told anyone. Something that needs to be in the book, but I'm terrified to include it." I waited, pen ready. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. I have maybe 6 months, a year if I'm lucky. That's why I wanted this book done fast. That's why it matters so much." The confession hit me harder than I expected. In all my years writing for the dying, and most of my clients were, in their way, dying, aging, trying to outrun mortality, I'd maintained a certain distance. But Dominic had gotten under my skin. Perhaps because I saw myself in his isolation, his hunger for connection he didn't know how to achieve. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. I've made my peace with it." He laughed weakly. "Well, that's a lie. I'm terrified. But I'm trying to make my peace with it." He looked at me directly. "That's what I need you to capture in the ending. Not triumph, not redemption. Just acceptance. The acknowledgement that I lived, I mattered, even if I didn't always live well." As I wrote his final chapters over the next weeks, something shifted in my approach. I still wove in my own memories. I couldn't help it, it was how I worked. But I was more careful now, more respectful. When I described Dominic's fear of oblivion, I drew on my own terror of being forgotten. But I made sure his voice remained dominant, his truth the primary thread. In the margins of the manuscript, invisible to anyone but me, I wrote small notes. Acknowledgments of where his story ended and mine began. An attempt at honesty, even if no one would ever read it. Miranda and I worked through the spring and into summer, meeting twice a week in my office, spinning my centuries into a narrative that felt both true and fantastical. She was a brilliant writer in her own right, pushing me to dig deeper, to reveal more than I was comfortable revealing. "You keep writing around the pain," she said during one of our sessions. "Give me the real memory of your turning, not the sanitized version." So I did. I told her about Elise Morgenstern, the vampire who found me dying of consumption in a Munich alley in 1781. I told her how she offered me a choice, death or darkness, and how my terror of non-existence drove me to choose damnation. I told her about the agony of transformation, the first desperate hunt, the morning I realized I'd never see sunlight again without burning. "And Elise?" Miranda asked. "What happened to her?" "She stayed with me for 73 years, I said quietly. "Taught me everything. How to hunt without killing. How to move through human society unseen. How to build new identities as the old ones aged." And then one morning, she walked into the sunrise and let herself burn to ash. Why? She was tired. She'd lived for 800 years, and she was tired. I closed my eyes, remembering that last conversation. She told me she'd been looking for a reason to keep going, and training me had given her that. But once I was ready to survive on my own, she had no reason left. Miranda's hand found mine across the desk. "I'm sorry. Don't be." She made her choice. We all do, in the end. Dominic's book was published in September to significant acclaim. The New York Times called it unflinchingly honest, Kirkus Review praised its emotional depth, and it debuted at number 3 on the bestseller list. Dominic did a handful of interviews, his health already visibly declining, and talked about the catharsis of telling his truth. No one noticed the fragments of my life woven through his. The description of watching a loved one die that drew from both his wife's long illness and my sister's consumption. The passage about feeling like an outsider at his own success that blended his isolation with mine. The final chapter about accepting mortality, where my fear of endless existence merged with his fear of impending death. It was my best work, and also my most conflicted. Dominic sent me a message 2 weeks after publication. "Thank you for making me sound like I had wisdom I never possessed. The book is better than my life deserved." I didn't respond. What could I say? That he was right, that I'd elevated him beyond his actual insight? That he'd been a canvas for my own confessions? That in writing his story, I'd been trying to redeem both of us? Our manuscript, mine and Miranda's, was nearly complete when she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you want me to turn you?" I asked before she could speak. We'd grown close enough that I could read it in her eyes, the curiosity that was curdling into hunger. "Would you?" she countered. "No." The word was firm. Petra still regrets it sometimes, even after 12 years. This existence. It's not a gift, Miranda. It's a curse wrapped in the illusion of immortality. But you've survived for 2 centuries. You've witnessed history, preserved stories. "I've stolen stories," I interrupted. "Don't romanticize what I do. I'm a thief, taking moments from other people's lives and claiming them as my own because I can't have my own moments anymore." Miranda was quiet for a long time. Then, "Is that really how you see it?" "Because I've read everything you've written, Lars. Every autobiography, every fragment. And yes, you're borrowing. But you're also giving something back. You're making these people's stories better, deeper, more universal. That's not theft. That's alchemy." "Is it?" I asked. "Or is it just a sophisticated lie I tell myself to justify my parasitic existence?" Dominic Thorne died 3 weeks before Christmas, in a hospice in Connecticut surrounded by the children he'd barely known and the empire he'd built at their expense. Petra called to tell me, her voice gentle. "He left you something in his will," she said. "A letter." The letter arrived by courier the next day. Dominic's handwriting, shaky but determined. "Lars Aester, I know what you are. I've known since our 3rd session, when you described a sunset over the Danube, and I realized no one our age should remember the river before it was industrialized. I'm not an idiot, despite how I may have appeared. Asterisk. I didn't say anything because I was grateful. You gave me words for feelings I didn't know how to express. You made my mediocre life sound profound. You lied, beautifully, and in doing so, you told a deeper truth than I could have managed alone. Asterisk. But here's what you need to understand. Those weren't just your memories in my book. They became mine when I read them. Your grief for your sister? I felt it when my wife died. Your isolation? I lived it every day. Your fear of being forgotten? It's the same fear every mortal has. Asterisk. You think you're stealing our stories. But maybe you're just recognizing that all stories are shared. That there are only so many ways to be human, or to remember being human. And by writing yourself into our narratives, you're not erasing us. You're joining us. You're admitting that underneath the immortality and the hunger, you're still one of us. Asterisk. That's worth something, I think. That's worth everything. Asterisk. Thank you for writing my life better than I lived it. Dominic. I read the letter 3 times, then burned it. But the words stayed with me, burrowing into the place where my heart used to beat. Miranda and I finished our manuscript in February, exactly 1 year after I'd begun working with Dominic. Chronicles of a Vampiric Ghostwriter, we called it. A novel about Lars Aester, immortal scribe, weaving his existence through the autobiographies of the famous. Miranda's agent loved it. Publishers bid for it. The marketing department at the Winning House called it, And Rice Meets the Devil Wears Prada, a literary thriller about the price of immortality and the power of stories. No one suspected it was real. Or if they did, they didn't care. Fiction, truth. In the end, what mattered was the story itself. On the night before our book launched, Miranda and I sat in my office, drinking wine, her with enjoyment, me purely for the ritual of it. "Do you think this absolves you?" she asked. "Telling your story this way?" "No," I said honestly. "But maybe it's a step toward honesty. Toward acknowledging what I am and what I've done." "And what happens now?" "You keep ghost writing." I considered the question. I had 3 new clients lined up, all eager for my services. But something had shifted. Dominic's letter, Miranda's book, the act of finally seeing my own story reflected back at me, it had changed something fundamental. "I think," I said slowly, "I'll try writing them differently. Still weaving in my own memories, my own truths. But more consciously, more carefully. Not stealing their stories, but collaborating. The way you and I did. A partnership between the living and the dead," Miranda mused. "Something like that." Our book published to modest but enthusiastic reviews. It didn't hit any bestseller lists, but it found its audience. Readers who appreciated the metafictional elements, the questions about authorship and authenticity, the blurred lines between truth and invention. Some reviewers called it too clever by half. Others praised its meditation on the nature of storytelling in the age of ghostwritten celebrity memoirs. One particularly perceptive critic wrote, "One can't help but wonder how much of this is autobiography masquerading as fiction." If only they knew. But the most unexpected response came from other ghostwriters. I received dozens of emails from colleagues I'd never met, thanking me for capturing what we do. They spoke of the strange intimacy of writing someone else's life, the way you inevitably leave traces of yourself in the work. They talked about the ethics of it, the art of it, the loneliness of creating something you can never claim as your own. They didn't know they were writing to the character from the book. To them, Lars Aester was just another pseudonym, another writer hiding behind initials and LLC registrations. The irony was delicious. It was Petra who forced the final reckoning. 6 months after our book published, she came to my apartment and announced she was leaving. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I've spent 12 years as your assistant, your creation, your reflection. But I need to figure out who I am beyond what you made me." "Where will you go?" I asked, surprised by the ache in my chest. Not quite grief, but close enough. "West. Maybe Portland. Maybe Seattle. Somewhere rainy where I can hide from the sun and still feel like I'm living." She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. "You taught me how to survive, Lars. But you never taught me how to live. I need to figure that out on my own." "Will you write?" I asked. "Your own stories?" She smiled sadly. "Probably. Though knowing you, some of my stories are probably yours too. You have a way of getting under people's skin." After she left, the apartment felt cavernous. I wandered through rooms filled with centuries of accumulated possessions, each one a memory, a story, a fragment of the endless narrative of my existence. For the first time in decades, I felt truly alone. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe I'd been hiding from my own story for so long that I'd forgotten how to be alone with it. Her name was Yuki Kimura, and she was a physicist on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum computing. She'd won a MacArthur grant at 32, published revolutionary papers, and now wanted to write a memoir about the intersection of science and spirituality, logic and intuition. "I want people to understand that science isn't cold," she told me in our first meeting. "It's deeply human. Every equation is a story, every theory a kind of hope." As she talked, I took notes, already feeling the familiar pull of connection. Her description of seeing patterns in chaos reminded me of trying to find meaning in immortality. Her frustration with being misunderstood echoed my own isolation. Her hunger to communicate something true resonated with my centuries-long struggle to preserve my existence through others' words. But this time, I stopped myself before automatically weaving my memories into her narrative. "Yuki," I said, "I need to tell you something about how I work. About what I really do." I didn't tell her everything. I'm not that reckless. But I told her about the process, about how I instinctively embed my own experiences into the autobiographies I write, how I use my clients' lives as vessels for my own memories. "I want to be transparent with you," I said. "You deserve to know that when you hire me, you're not just getting a writer. You're getting a collaborator who will bring his own story to yours. If you want a pure transcription of your life, I'm not the right person." Yuki considered this for a long moment. Then she surprised me. "I think that's exactly what I want," she said. "Science taught me that nothing exists in isolation. Every particle is entangled with others. Every observation changes what's observed. Maybe autobiography is the same. Maybe the best stories are collaborations between the subject and the scribe. Even if it means your words won't be entirely your own." "Are any words entirely our own?" she countered. "We learn language from others, build on others' ideas, describe our experiences using frameworks others created. Maybe honesty is admitting that we're all ghost writing for each other, all weaving our stories together." Working with Yuki was different. I still added my own memories. I couldn't help it, it was how I processed the world. But now I told her when I was doing it. We'd be discussing her experience of a breakthrough, and I'd say, "There's a moment I remember from 1856, watching the sunrise after a long night of fear. Can I blend that feeling with your description of solving this equation?" Sometimes she'd say yes. Sometimes she'd say no. That particular moment needed to be purely hers. And I respected that, trimmed my sails, found different ways to contribute without overwhelming. The manuscript we created together was strange and beautiful, part science memoir, part philosophical meditation, part hidden vampire confession. Readers wouldn't know which parts were hers and which were mine, and increasingly, I wasn't sure either. We'd become entangled, our stories collapsing into a shared narrative that belonged to both of us and neither of us. "This is what authorship should be," Yuki said one afternoon, reading over a chapter we'd just finished. "Not ownership, but partnership. Not a single voice, but a chorus." Miranda came to visit that fall, bringing news and coffee. The good kind, the kind I could no longer taste but appreciated for the aroma and the ritual. "I've been offered a book deal," she announced, "for a sequel to our book. They want more stories about Lars Aester, the vampire ghostwriter." "But we told my story," I protested. "What else is there?" "Your other subjects," she said. "All the people you've written for over the centuries. We could create a collection of interconnected tales, each one revealing more of your history while telling someone else's story. Fiction, of course. But true fiction." I thought about the 37 autobiographies I'd ghostwritten, the hundreds of subjects I'd interviewed, the centuries of lives I'd touched and been touched by. Each one a thread in the tapestry of my existence. "We'd need to change the names, alter details," I said. "I won't betray my clients' confidences." "Of course. We'd treat them like you treated yourself, real stories dressed as fiction. True confessions disguised as invention." "It feels recursive," I said. "Meta. Writing about writing about writing. Isn't all storytelling recursive?" Miranda countered. "Every story comments on every other story. Every narrator is unreliable. Every truth is subjective. We might as well be honest about it." That winter, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went through my archives, reading every autobiography I'd ghostwritten, tracing the threads of my own life woven through other people's narratives. In a senator's memoir from 1943, I found my memory of the trenches of World War I, where I'd served as a medic, unable to die but surrounded by death. In an actress's tell-all from 1987, I discovered my description of watching the Berlin Wall fall, the joy and terror of watching history pivot. In a tech CEO's leadership book from 2003, I recognized my own struggle with power, the burden of living long enough to see every ideology rise and fall and rise again. I'd thought I was stealing. But reading these books again, I realized I'd been doing something different. I'd been preserving. Not just my memories, but the universal experiences they represented. Grief, joy, fear, love. The fundamental emotions that connect all conscious beings, mortal and otherwise. Dominic had been right. By writing myself into others' stories, I hadn't erased them. I'd joined them. I'd admitted that despite the fangs and the hunger and the centuries, I was still part of the great human chorus, still singing the same songs of longing and loss and hope. Yuki's book published in spring to significant acclaim. The New York Times called it a stunning meditation on the beauty of uncertainty. Scientific American praised its accessible explanation of complex quantum concepts. But my favorite review came from a small literary journal that noted, "Kimura's prose has an uncanny timelessness, as if she's channeling voices from across centuries. Her descriptions of wonder and discovery feel ancient and modern simultaneously." After the book launched, Yuki came to me with an unexpected proposal. "I'm starting a foundation," she said, "for emerging scientists who want to communicate their work to broader audiences. I want to fund ghostwriters who can help them tell their stories. And I want you to lead it." "Why me?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Because you understand that stories don't belong to individuals. They belong to all of us. You've been proving that for centuries, whether you knew it or not." "I'm not sure I'm the right person to run a foundation," I said, "given my unique circumstances." "Petra could handle the day-to-day operations," Yuki said. She must have seen my expression because she quickly added, "I tracked her down in Portland. She's interested. She said she's been thinking about coming back, but only if it was for something meaningful." The idea of working with Petra again, of building something larger than my own survival, appealed to me more than I wanted to admit. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, I climbed to the roof of my building and watched the city pulse with life below. Lights in windows, each one representing a story, a life, a narrative unfolding in real time. How many of those stories would be written down? How many would be lost? How many would be transformed by someone like me, a scribe trying to preserve not just facts but feelings, not just events but essence? My phone buzzed. A text from Miranda, writing the sequel. First story is about a vampire who wrote for Benjamin Franklin. Any truth to that? I smiled. There was truth to it, though not in the way she imagined. I'd never written for Franklin himself, but I had written for one of his descendants, a newspaper editor in Philadelphia in 1876. I'd woven in my own memories of the founding father's era, second-hand and fragmentary, but vivid nonetheless. I texted back, "Fiction, remember? It's all fiction." Her response was immediate. "The best lies are the ones we believe ourselves." I accepted Yuki's offer. Petra returned from Portland, bringing a clarity and purpose she hadn't had before. Together, we built the Kimura Foundation for Scientific Storytelling, funding ghostwriters to work with scientists, helping them translate their breakthroughs into narratives that could inspire and educate. It was different from my previous work. More collaborative. More honest. We trained the writers to see themselves not as invisible scribes but as active participants in the storytelling process, bringing their own experiences and insights to bear while respecting the primacy of their subjects' voices. Some of the old ghostwriters hated it. "You're ruining the craft," one colleague told me. "The writer is supposed to disappear, to become transparent." "But we never disappear," I argued. "We're always there, in the word choices, the metaphors, the rhythm of the prose. Why not acknowledge it? Why not embrace it?" 5 years after Dominic's death, I received a package from his estate. Inside was a manuscript, handwritten in his shaky final script. A note was paper-clipped to the front. "Lars Aester, I wrote this in the last weeks of my life. My real autobiography, not the polished version you created. I'm not going to publish it. It's too raw, too ugly. But I wanted you to have it. I wanted you to see what you transformed. Asterisk. I don't blame you for making me sound better than I was. That's what I hired you for. But I thought you should know what you're working with when you write these books. The messy, complicated, often disappointing reality. Asterisk. Keep doing what you do. But remember that the people you write for are human, flawed, beautiful in our imperfection. We don't need to be made perfect. We just need to be seen. Asterisk. This is me, seeing you back. D. I read Dominic's manuscript straight through. It was honest in a way the published book wasn't, bitter, self-recriminating, occasionally cruel. It was also profoundly human, in all the ways that word can mean. And it made me realize something. For 2 centuries, I've been trying to recapture my own lost humanity by hiding it in others' stories. But humanity isn't something you can preserve like a specimen in amber. It's messy, changing, contradictory. It's the struggle, not the solution. The question, not the answer. I'd been looking backward, trying to hold on to who I was in 1781. But maybe the point wasn't to preserve that vanished boy from Bavaria. Maybe the point was to acknowledge who I'd become, this strange hybrid of human memory and vampire existence, this creature who lived in the margins between truth and fiction, life and death, authorship and theft. Miranda's sequel published to even better reviews than the first book. Critics praised the complex exploration of authorship across time, the meditation on what it means to tell someone else's story, the blurring of lines between fact and fiction that feels urgent in our post-truth era. Some readers tried to decode it, to figure out which stories were real and which were invented. They created websites, forums, conspiracy theories. One particularly dedicated fan claimed to have tracked down actual autobiographies that matched the ones in Miranda's book, proving that Lars Aester was real. They were wrong, of course. And also right. Lars Aester was real, but the evidence they'd found was circumstantial, coincidental. The truth was both simpler and stranger than they imagined. I'm writing this now. My own words, my own story, no collaboration, no client to hide behind, because Miranda asked me to contribute to the 3rd book in the series. She wants it to be my actual autobiography, written as fiction, the final layer in our recursive narrative structure. Give me your truth, she said. Not embedded in someone else's story. Not disguised as fiction. Just your truth, and we'll let readers decide what to believe. So here it is. 243 years of existence, distilled into this narrative. The truth of Lars Aester, vampire ghostwriter, thief of stories, preserver of memories, collaborator in the great human project of making meaning from chaos. I don't know if this absolves me of anything. I still believe, on some level, that I've been stealing, taking moments and feelings that belong to others and claiming them as my own. But I also believe, increasingly, that stories don't work that way. They aren't property to be owned. They're currency to be exchanged, gifts to be shared, bridges connecting the isolated islands of individual consciousness.